Before smoke jumping began in 1939, wildland firefighting was much slower, rougher, and far more grueling. Crews had to reach fires on foot, horseback, or by mule train, sometimes hiking day and night with heavy tools and supplies strapped right on their backs. Remote fires were spotted by a Forest Service lookout perched in towers who relayed the word by phone, telegraph, or radio. Once on site, firefighters relied on the same hand tools that smoke jumpers would later carry, such as Pulaskis, shovels, axes, crosscut saws, McLeods, and water bags, all of which they hauled through rivers, steep canyons, and dense timber. Without the cargo drops, crews had to pack in their own food and bedrolls, eating simple meals such as canned goods, and often slept on the bare ground. Firefighting itself meant carving miles of fire line by hand, throwing dirt onto flames, and sometimes setting backfires which would rob the wildfire of fuel. But without modern equipment such as fire shelters or rapid escape options, survival depended on quick thinking and favorable terrain. By the late 1930s, the Forest Service realized that some fires were simply too remote and fast-moving to be reached in time. Luckily, with the introduction of aviation and some creative minds, we were able to put together the radical idea of parachuting firefighters directly into the wilderness, aka the smoke jumping program was born. Hello and welcome to Montana After Midnight. I'm Devin and I created this channel to talk about the most interesting Montana history. I covered things like the night of the Grizzlies, as well as true crime, unsolved murders, and even some Montana legends. If that sounds interesting to you at all, I highly recommend subscribing because I put a mountain of work, especially into this video, but every single thing that I create for this channel. So if that interests you, hit that subscribe button. Without further ado, let's jump into the tragedy of the Mann Gulch fire. But before we do that, I want to break down the history of smoke jumping, as well as set the scene of what a smoke jumper might bring in to a fire that they're parachuting into, as well as talking about the area of Mann Gulch, the gates of the Rocky Mountains, as Lewis and Clark called it, because I think that that background information is very useful. Anyway, without further ado, I really appreciate you being here with me. Let's get into the video. The smoke jumping program was created to serve as the first line of defense against wildfires, dropping from the sky to reach fires in places where roads and trails simply could not. The general idea of the smoke jumping program, according to the Forest Service, was by parachuting self-sufficient firefighters to reach the fire, they could arrive fresh and ready for the strenuous work that was fighting fires in rugged terrain. The program began as an experiment in 1939 in the Pacific Northwest. Just a year later, in 1940, Rufus Robertson and Earl Cooley made the first official fire jump in the Nez Perce National Forest, proving that the concept could work. Following this jump, Montana quickly became a central part of smoke jumping history. An early base was built and known as the 9 Mile Camp. This was northwest of Missoula, but over time the operations moved over to Missoula itself, with a Smokejumper base being built there. This base eventually became one of the most important hubs for Smokejumper operations in the entire region and the entire US. While the development of smoke jumping was exciting and rapidly growing, the early days of aerial deployment involved a lot of danger, as the equipment and the procedure had to be invented from scratch. With World War II reaching America, smoke jumping would soon intersect with the military. The US government created the Civilian Public Service, or the CPS, for men who were conscientious objectors. These COs were offered work of national importance, which included smoke jumping. The first CPS smoke jumper unit was based in Missoula, Montana. By the end of the war, nearly 240 COs had been trained as smoke jumpers, and they played a critical role in keeping the program alive, while the local men who would usually be jumping out of planes risking their lives decided to do it overseas instead. Also in late 1944, Japan launched Fogo balloon bombs, which were hydrogen bombs carrying incendiaries and sometimes explosive devices designed to ride the jet stream and ignite wildfires across the US. There was 9,000 launched and roughly 300 made it to landfall from Alaska all the way down to Mexico. Most caused little damage, but they were taken seriously as a potential threat. To counter it, the Army turned to the 555th Parachute Infantry Battalion, the first all-black paratrooper unit known as the Triple Nichols. 555. Instead of fighting overseas, they were assigned the secret Firefire project, parachuting into remote forest as smoke jumpers. They trained in Pendleton, Oregon, and were dispatched to fight fires that could have been sparked by balloon bombs. None of the fires that they fought were sparked by these balloon bombs, but they fought dozens of lightning-caused fires in extremely rough terrain. Eventually, World War II came to a close and smoke jumping went back to business as normal. Fast forward to 1948, Montana experienced an unusual year. Floods and heavy moisture all but replaced the typical fire season. Missoula jumpers saw limited action and went all the way down to southern Utah for fire jumping work. This quiet season soon passed as just a year later, on August 4th, 1949, the Mann Gulch Fire erupted in the Montana wilds near Helena. Mann Gulch is located in northern Montana within the gates of the mountains wilderness, part of Helena National Forest, which is about an hour and 15 minutes away from Helena itself. It lies along the Missouri River and a rugged canyon stretch named by Meriwether Lewis in July of 1805. As the Corps of Discovery pushed upriver, Lewis marveled at the sheer cliffs rising hundreds of feet above the water, writing in his journal how the river appears to have forced its way through the immense body of solid rock for a distance of 5 3/4 miles, concluding that from the singular appearance of the place, I called it the Gates of the Rocky Mountain. Looking at the map, you could see why he would consider this to be the gate of the Rocky Mountains, as via their route, this is where the mountains started to erupt out of the ground, breaking up the plains that come eastward of the Rocky Mountains. Tall rocky outcrops and the broken cliffs make movement difficult, while also funneling immense winds. In 1949, the lower gulch was dominated by cheatgrass and bunchgrass, fine fuels that ignite easily and burn explosively. Scattered ponderosa pine and patches of Douglas fir dotted the slopes, while sparse brush allowed fire to carry rapidly throughout the grass in a flashy fashion. Today, the area has seen regrowth, and grass remains a serious fire hazard. Summers in Mann Gulch are hot, dry, and windy, and create prime fire conditions with an afternoon upslope winds that accelerate fire spread throughout the canyons. In 1949, the gulch was remote with no roads. Only the river and steep trails provided access. Today, visitors can hike into the gulch from the Missouri River or surrounding ridges, where memorial crosses that mark the spots where each smoke jumper fell, making it both an historic site as well as a solemn place of remembrance. The Missouri River, if you didn't know, is the longest river in the United States, and it flows for more than 2,500 miles from its headwaters near Three Forks, Montana, to its confluence with the Mississippi River at St. Louis. In 1976, Congress designated that 149 miles of the upper Missouri as part of the National Wild and Scientific River System, calling it an irreplaceable legacy of historic American West. Along the way, the river sustains a rich ecosystem. Its valley is a geological record of an ancient inland sea that once covered much of the Great Plains, leaving behind layered formations that were later folded, faulted, and uplifted into rugged landscapes visible today. Historically, the river was a vital artery of the Western expansion, and Lewis and Clark spent 3 weeks in 1805 exploring this very section, which remains a premier component of the Lewis and Clark National Historic Trail. Today, the upper Missouri continues to draw visitors with opportunities to float the waters, fish, hike, camp, hunt, and experience the solitude of Montana's backcountry, while also providing important contributions to the local lifestyles and the region's economy. The young men sent out into the remote wilderness carried a carefully selected set of tools. Axes, shovels, and saws were commonplace, but above all was the Pulaski. A Pulaski is a combination of an axe and a hoe, and it is truly a firefighter's weapon. It was invented in 1911 by Assistant Ranger Ed Pulaski after Idaho's devastating Great Fire of 1910, which highlighted the need for better equipment. By 1936, the Pulaski had become a Forest Service standard. Another notable piece of equipment was the McLeod. It's a rake and a hoe and a tamper all mixed together, designed for scraping and clearing. Fun fact about me, the McLeod is my favorite landscaping tool. 2 summers ago, I spent my days on a grounds crew working on a dude ranch. I first used the McLeod when I was working on a mountain biking trail, and we had to fix a small stream that was running straight through the trail. And from that project forward, I always loved the McLeod. It's extremely versatile, and it pretty much just gets the job done. It's sturdy, and I love it. Anyway, I was super excited to learn that it was originally invented for wildfire containment, which makes it even cooler. The McLeod was created in 1905 by Forest Service Ranger Malcolm McLeod, and it quickly became a firefighting staple by the 1930s and into the 1940s. While the McLeod is my personal favorite, in my research looking into the Mann Gulch fire, it suggests that the Pulaski has become much more of the iconic firefighting tool. Norman McLean, in his book Young Men and Fire, even takes the time to describe the Pulaski in heavy detail and emphasizes its importance. Now, I also can admit that an axe mixed with a hoe is much cooler than a rake that you can tamp the ground with, so I can see why the Pulaski became much more iconic. The Pulaski's design made it perfect for chopping through roots, cutting brush, and digging into soft soil. On the fire line, Smokejumpers and grounds crew used Pulaskis to dig through control lines, stripping the ground all the way down to its bare soil, intending to stop the flames from spreading. Its versatility allowed for firefighters to both cut and dig without the need for separate tools. The McLeod, by contrast, was designed for more clearing than chopping. With a wide hoe blade on one side and rake-like tips on the other, it was perfect for scraping away grass and leaves, or for smoothing out a fire line after it was dug. In operation, the McLeods were often used right after the Pulaski. Once the heavier digging and chopping was done, the McLeod could be used to clean up the line down to its bare earth, ensuring that no fuel remained to carry the fire across. Together, these two tools formed the backbone of firefighting suppression in the mid-20th century. Besides tools, Smokejumpers in the 1940s also carried a small but essential set of survival items: a letdown rope in case any of them were hung up in a tree, a canteen for drinking water, a very basic first aid kit, and simple rations, often K-rations or canned food. Most importantly, they carried matches. This detail is crucial to the Mann Gulch story, as it became the spark of both one of the survival stories and the biggest controversy of the tragedy. Matches were issued to wilderness firefighters for the purpose of setting a backfire. A backfire is a strategic tool where firefighters light a blaze in front of the firing line that they've created. The new fire burns towards the approaching fire, consuming all the grass and brush before the main fire can reach them. When done correctly, the wildfire runs out of fuel and loses momentum, and it hits the already burnt ground. Backfiring was an official firefighting method, but it required near perfect conditions and wasn't always successful. Before these young men could even use any of these tools, they would need to earn their name of Smokejumper. They would do this by jumping out of planes over rugged terrain, mirroring and accompanying raging fire. By 1949, the act of jumping from a plane was routine and was guided by strict and simple systems, but it still carried its dangers. The smokejumping crew flew a C-47, which was stripped of its seats, which would make room for the men and their gear. When the plane reached the fire site, the jump master opened the door and carefully judged the surroundings. This was the terrain, wind, and fire behavior. Once a spot was chosen, the men prepared to leap. They wore heavy canvas jumpsuits padded at the elbows, hips, and knees, along with football-style helmets and letdown ropes. The jumpers would line up at the door, and they clipped a static line which attached their parachute pack. This was a cable that was inside the aircraft, which meant when they stepped out into the rushing wind and dropped from the plane, the static line would yank their parachute open automatically. The day of the Mann Gulch fire tragedy, the men dropped in groups of 4. They would be tapped on the knee when the spotter wanted them to jump. As the men descended towards the rugged ridges and dense timber, they would try to steer as best they could with little toggles, although the control was limited compared to modern parachutes. It was common for smoke jumpers to land in trees where the letdown rope would allow them to rappel safely to the ground. After landing, their gear was dropped separately in cargo containers. These cargo containers were also attached to parachutes, and after landing, the jumpers would regroup with each other, collect their tools, get their gear, and move towards the fire. Since 1949, the equipment has improved quite a bit, And at the end of this video, I will be going into the modern smoke jumping system and equipment. But for now, I think it's time we finally discuss the actual day and tragedy of the Mann Gulch fire. It was a hot day in early August, 97 degrees to be exact, so hot that it was said to be a record at the time, although decades later temperatures had been recorded as high as 105. By August, the gulch had turned a dusty, dry brown, and conditions were no doubt much hotter than the recorded temperature in Helena of 97 at the time. Originally, the Forest Service had called for 25 men to be sent to Mann Gulch, but only 16 men could be spared from the Missoula base camp. Those 16 would soon find themselves in for a turbulent and fateful mission. Leading them was their foreman, R. Wagner Dodge, otherwise known as WAG. At 33, Dodge was a seasoned firefighter with more than a decade of experience over most of his crew members. But age and experience wasn't the only thing that separated him and the crew members that were sent out on this mission. In smoke jumping culture, it is tradition for crews to work, train, and spend downtime together, building trust and camaraderie that often meant the difference between life and death out in the field. Dodge, however, was so skilled, he had a completely different routine from his crew members. He was often sent on mechanical work and repairing things inside of the base camp, which meant that he did not have a lot of time to build that tight-knit community with the rest of his crew members. And by some accounts, on the day of the fire, he hadn't even learned every single crew member's name when he was sent to Mann Gulch. Accompanying the crew members on the plane was Earl Cooley. He played the important role of spotter, and it was his job to find a safe and secure place for the smoke jumpers to land. He had to track the wind, the terrain, and the distance between the jumpers. And he was also in charge of dropping the cargo after the last jumper had landed, basically setting up the target location to have everything that all the jumpers would possibly need. And if you were paying close attention, you would know that Cooley was also one of the first smoke jumpers to ever do it. I referenced him earlier in this video, and he was one of the people that proved that the concept of smoke jumping could work a decade earlier, and he clearly stuck with the art and history of smoke jumping. The flight was rough, so rough that one man even refused to jump, leaving only 15 smoke jumpers to confront the fire. Cooley did eventually locate a spot for the men to jump on the north ridge of the Mann Gulch, which was on the opposite side of the fire. They went out in groups of 4, with each man hoping to be picked really early because that's how sickening this flight was. It was so turbulent, the men just wanted to jump out of the airplane, literally. With all the men out of the plane, Jim Cooley set the cargo down, and only 2 things were damaged in their descent down to Mann Gulch. One of them was Wagner Dodge, who actually cut his arm so bad that the bone was showing, but he was able to bandage himself up relatively quickly. The other thing that was damaged was their one and only radio, which was completely destroyed and unusable. With Dodge quickly bandaging himself up, it was his job to direct the crew and their job to listen to his orders. The second in command was a 28-year-old seasoned smoke jumper named Bill Hellman. He was the second oldest jumper compared to Dodge and had the second most experience. Hellman's role was to repeat Dodge's commands down the line and hold the position near the rear, ensuring that no man fell behind while Dodge led from the front. Hellman had a better relationship with the men and was seen as a loyal member of the smoke jumping crew. After the jump, the men gathered themselves, meeting up and waiting for Dodge's first order. However, soon after landing, the men and Dodge could hear shouting from lower on the ridge, making it apparent that they were not on the ridge alone. Dodge's first order was for the men to collect all the gear and huddle up together while he went lower on the ridge to investigate who was making the noise calling out for help. In his search lower on the ridge, Dodge encountered James Harrison, a fire guard who had already been on the fire for several hours before the smoke jumpers arrived. Harrison was no stranger to smoke jumping, and he had once been a smoke jumper himself the previous year. However, he resigned due to his mother's worries of the job being too dangerous, and that day he had hiked up the ridge and started fighting the fire all by himself using his previous smoke jumper knowledge. According to Dodge, Harrison looked extremely exhausted after battling the fire by himself for hours on end, and was very delighted to see that the Smokejumpers had arrived and that he could take some of the pressure off of his back. Harrison had been on patrol that morning and reported the fire from his station in the Meriwether Canyon area, and then he had crossed the Missouri River by boat, hiked up the gulch, and started working on controlling the fire. Now is a good time to talk about that during the summer, there is a phenomenon where thunderstorms and lightning can appear, but the dry conditions cause any rain to evaporate before actually even hitting the ground. This means that lightning has the dangerous capability of hitting completely dry and flammable foliage at incredible temperatures, sparking disastrous wildfires. This is an extremely common cause of wildfires and is exactly what happened that morning in Mann Gulch, which created this now infamous fire. After surveying the flames and speaking with the exhausted Harrison, Dodge devised a plan of attack. The men would flank the fire from the west by hiking down and across the north slope, while making an open escape route to the Missouri River. Regrouping with the Smokejumpers, Dodge issued the order to head west. With Dodge at the front and Hellman bringing up the rear of the crew, the men made the march towards the river. A sudden gust of wind funneled through the gulch, carrying burning embers from high up on the south slope down into the grass at the base of the north slope, creating a spot fire, which is an offshoot sparked by embers of a main fire. Within moments, this spot fire exploded into a blow-up. And a blow-up is the term used when a fire that seemed controllable rapidly intensifies to the point where it cannot be controlled any longer. This is extremely dangerous and a horrifying spot for a firefighter to be in. This blew up formed due to the unique wind conditions of cool and hot air battling each other and creating a chimney-like effect, which caused the fire to spread in completely unexpected ways. And in an instant, the crew's escape route to the Missouri River, a well-thought-out planned attack, was completely cut off, and the men were surrounded by flames. Their only chance to escape this impending fire was to race up the steep ridge before they were overtaken by one of nature's most violent forces. Dodge immediately gave the order for the men to turn around and climb to the top of the mountain. Backtracking up the ridge was grueling, but it was the only call for the wilderness firefighter to make. In fact, both of Dodge's orders so far have been standard practice for the Forest Service protocol, and given the circumstances, were pretty much the best options available. His first command to head towards the river would have offered an ideal escape route if the fire grew out of control, giving the men a chance to safely regroup, not accounting for the unexpected spot fire that completely cut them off before they could even get there. Then, once it had became clear that the fire had cut off that initial route, the only safe ground was higher up on the ridge. Now, unfortunately, wildfire behavior was poorly understood at the time, and smoke jumping itself was still in its infancy. These limitations meant that even the best calls set the stage for this disaster that followed. Somewhere between 200 and 500 yards into their retreat, Dodge had gave another critical order: drop all of your equipment. He knew in his heart that this was no longer a mission to battle a raging fire, but it was a race for survival. And anything that would slow a man down would cost him his life. That being said, only about half of the crew threw down their McLeods and Pulaskis. In Young Men and Fire, Norman McLean suggests that for some, letting go of their tools was unthinkable. Simply put, they were Forest Service firefighters, the best of the best, and to drop their shovels felt like surrender. And as though that they were no longer sent there to control the fire, but to flee from it, which was just too much for them to take. McLean points out the 10 o'clock fire policy, the idea that every wildfire should be brought under control by 10 a.m. the next morning after the fire was started. And the Smokejumpers were the tip of the spear of this aggressive attack. They were parachuting in to crush these fires before they even had a chance to spread. Most fires were routine and were wrapped up quickly. So when the crew dropped into Mann Gulch, they believed that they were facing yet another 10 o'clock fire, and it was nothing that they couldn't handle. But now they were being told to drop their fire-killing tools and to run away, which was just unthinkable at the time. At this point after the order, the fire was getting louder, making it harder for the men to hear each other, and the smoke was filling up their lungs as they marched up the ridge. The ridge itself was brutally steep at about a 76 grade, which is more than twice as steep as the highest incline most treadmills can be set to. In less than half a mile, they had to climb 600 feet of elevation, scrambling for their lives while the fire charged uphill at nearly 600 feet per minute, which is faster than an average man can sprint on flat ground, let alone this extreme angle that the men had to climb up. As the men marched up the ridge, with their lungs burning from smoke and exertion, it became clear that they would never be able to outrun this fire. The wall of flames was devouring the gulch below, racing upslope with a terrifying speed, and every step the crew took, the inferno crept closer to them. With the men strung out behind him on the steep hillside, Dodge stopped and looked back at the quickly approaching fire, then looked at the distant hill that the men still needed to climb. He knew that they would not be able to reach the peak in time, and in a move that seemed insane to the others, he struck a match and lit the tall, dry grass all around him. I told you that those matches would be important earlier. While doing so, he commanded his men to join him and stick close as he burned away the surrounding ground. But no one stopped. Even the most experienced men on the ground thought that he was crazy, passing him and striving to the top. One man even yelled as he passed, "To hell with that, I'm getting out of here." As the crew raced towards the top of the ridge, Robert Seeley and Walter Rumsey spotted a narrow crack in the rock wall. In a split second, they chose to dart right into it, gambling that it might lead to safety. Just behind those two men was Eldon Dietert, and he saw them disappear into the chute, but instead of going with them, he decided to stick with the majority of the men racing towards the top of the ridge. Sully and Rumsey scrambled through the crevice and came out onto a rocky hillside. From there, they bolted downslope to a patch of exposed rock where the flames could not reach them. As they huddled in that refuge, they looked down and caught a glimpse of Dodge. Dodge was completely alone, and he had lit all of the grass around him. It was now a barren patch of blackened earth. As the wall of flames roared up the ridge, Dodge laid face down in the ash, pressing a wet handkerchief right up against his mouth. The fire slammed over him with the roar of an emerging freight train, pushing him all around. When the fire passed, Dodge rose with only minor burns, surrounded by silence and a blackened, burnt slope. His men were nowhere in sight. Meanwhile, with Dodge being safe, the flames reached Sally and Rumsey's rock slide. They had maneuvered desperately within the rock slide to keep distance between themselves and the flames until they eventually made it out on the other side as the flames passed, sparing their lives. Their location, that rock slide which saved their lives, would later be known as Rescue Gulch. At the top of the ridge separating Mann Gulch from Rescue Gulch is a flat area large enough to gather a group. The landscape was eerie and devastated. The fire had swept through with a brutal efficiency, leaving behind a blackened, smoking slope. During the race against the fire, Robert Sully and Walter Rumsey followed the north edge of Dodge's escape fire to the ridgetop, successfully escaping all of the flames. After the blowup subsided, they found Bill Hellman, who followed the south edge of Dodge's escape fire towards the top of the ridge. He was badly burnt, but still alive. Dodge, who had survived by lying in his own fire, joined Sully and Rumsey and reported that he had found Joseph Sylvia alive, but also badly burnt. After the three men met up, Dodge and Sully proceeded down Rescue Gulch all the way to the Missouri River to seek help, while Rumsey would stay with Hellman. Sylvia was reported to be in a state of euphoria and absurdly optimistic about his dire state. It's speculated that this state of euphoria occurred because all of his nerve endings were burnt to a crisp and his body was in a severe state of shock. A rescue crew eventually arrived at 12:30 a.m. on August 6th and assisted Dodge in searching for and recovering the men. By 1:30 a.m., the crew located Sylvia and Hellman and began providing medical care. Both Hellman and Sylvia were eventually evacuated by 5 a.m., but unfortunately, tragically passed away in Helena's hospital the next day. The remaining 11 men and their charred equipment were all found within 300 yards of each other, and unfortunately, as you can assume, none of them survived. Among those men that lost their lives was Eldon Dietert. It was his 19th birthday, and he wasn't even assigned to jump in the Mann Gulch fire, but decided to help out and jump anyway. During the blow-up stage, the Mann Gulch fire burned an estimated 3,000 acres in about 10 minutes, and eventually it was reported that it consumed 4,300 acres in total. A total of 611 firefighters were used to bring this fire under control, which you don't need me to tell you that that is a far cry from the 16 firefighters originally sent to handle the Mann Gulch fire. Hello, I've been working on this video for so long. I didn't just get a haircut, I didn't just shave my beard. Completely moved. This is the new setup. I'm gonna make it look nicer. I don't know if this is where the camera's gonna live. You'd be surprised at how hard it is to find an appealing looking backdrop. So this is my best attempt. We're just moving in, but I want to finish this video because I put a lot of work into it. So, new area. Let's go. So it's hard to talk about Mann Gulch without mentioning Young Men and Fire. This is a book that I've been throwing around the entire video up to this point. And what it's all about is Norman McLean's journey on not just explaining what happened on Mann Gulch, but also doing an investigation on the things that have been lost over time within the Mann Gulch tragedy itself. This is like specific locations where certain men met their end, as well as where Dodge lit his fire. These things were all loosely marked at the time that they occurred, and they have little markings where they're at now, but when he was looking into it in the 70s, a lot of this was worn down, and there was a lot of confusion about where exactly things occurred. So I'm gonna do two things. One, I'm gonna illustrate for you what exactly happened on Mann Gulch, because I know it can be kind of confusing once you get into the nitty-gritty about like, wait, that happened where? This happened where? So I'm gonna break it down on the whiteboard for you in just a second. And then after I do that, I'm gonna go over the controversy of what the heck happened, why are people upset, and the aftermath of the fire after all these men unfortunately lost their lives. All right, new section of the video. It's a whiteboard section. I just poured myself a beautiful cup of caffeine-free Diet Coke, not sponsored, but I did go to Whitefish Oktoberfest, paid $30 for this mug, so I had to show it off. And it was a Montana thing I did, and this is Montana After Midnight. Huh, how cool. But I can be sponsored by Montana After Midnight merch. You guys can go pick up some if you really want to and help support me while I make cool videos like this on Montana history. Anyway, let's get into the whiteboard section. When I was listening to the audiobook and I was watching some documentaries on what happened in Mann Gulch and reading about it, things made sense, but as soon as I decided to start talking about it, I realized that I didn't have a clear map of what happened, and a lot of the maps online aren't super definitive. Like, some of them seem to conflict with other maps. So I'm going to draw for you really quickly a rough sketch of all the chaos that happened on Mann Gulch in 1949. So this very basic drawing that I've done so far, I highlighted the North Ridge and the South Ridge. And if you didn't know, a gulch, which this is obviously Mann Gulch, it's like that little dip right there. So this is the gulch, this is Mann Gulch, that's where the fire is happening. And then this at the bottom, of course, is the Missouri River. The initial fire took place on the South Ridge. So it was going on like over here in this area. So when James Harrison went up the Missouri, he was somewhere over here fighting the fire on the South Ridge. Of course, like any good whiteboard demonstration, all my markers are like running out of ink and everything is falling apart. So I'm basically a teacher. Now our smoke jumping crew, led by Dodge Wagner, they landed right around here. They're up on the North Ridge. This is where they found a safe spot. They all landed right here. They're regrouping right there. They parachuted down. So there's a little guy on his little parachute. This is where Dodge decides to meet up with James Harrison. Now, some of the maps have this little swoop of them meeting over here. Some of them don't even acknowledge James Harrison, but you can assume that they met kind of in the gulch in the deepest valley between the South Ridge and the North Ridge. They kind of looked at the fire that was on the South Ridge, and that's when Wagner Dodge decided that his plan of attack was to hike westward on the North Ridge down to the Missouri River, which is when, of course, tragedy struck, or all plans got thrown out of whack. And that's because the spot fire started to pop up over here, and then those spot fires turned into a blow up. And a blow up, like I mentioned earlier, is an uncontrollable fire. And Some diagrams even seem to show it converging with the original fire. And oh my goodness, there's this huge fire working towards the gulch, and the men never ever made it down to the Missouri River, which would have, given them safety through the water. They could have crossed the river and been safe. So their escape route was basically cut off before they could even start trying to fight the fire. So the fire is now pushing up this way, and Dodge makes the call that the men need to now run up the ridge. So they're kind of going in this direction, kind of back and up. Because like I said, this is a huge ridge here. It's a gulch. So this is super steep, and they decide that they need to kind of run up it. But because it's so steep, remember, it is steeper than any normal treadmill will even incline to. It's so steep that these men, especially way down with their equipment, are going to be struggling to climb. So Dodge, pretty much right away says, hey, drop everything. Literally barely moved 200 yards before he was like, all right, everyone drop everything. Somewhere running up the ridge, Dodge decides that it's hopeless, and he decides to light his own escape fire. Here's a close-up version of Dodge's escape fire. So the fire is chasing up after the men as they're all running this way to try to get to the peak of the ridge. Now there's two sides to the ridge. This is the side that has the fire, which leads to the south ridge of the Mann Gulch, and then the Missouri River is down here. But the fire is right on their tails as they need to run up the ridge. So Dodge, looking at the fire, then looking at the ridge, realizes they're not going to make it. So he starts lighting his escape fire and yelling at the men, who all disregard his orders, that they need to stick with him and start lighting the grass on fire. Rumsey and Sully run underneath him, and they find a crack in the ridge. Eldon Diedert was also right behind them, but Eldon Diedert decides to continue running up the ridge instead of going through the crack. Sully and Rumsey make it through the crack. They get to a rock slide, which basically saves their lives because the fire goes around the rock slide. But the fire keeps pushing even past Dodge's escape fire, which is all burnt out. He lays down in his escape fire. All the other men ran above his escape fire, still trying to make it stop the ridge. But eventually, the fire moved all the way past all of them, including Dodge, all of them, sparing Rumsey and Sully's life because they found a safe haven in a rock slide, which basically couldn't burn, so the fire had to go around it. And I'm just going to say it's right here, even though my marker is not working. And then Dodge was also safe, which I guess I'll just scribble it out too, because the fire couldn't burn his already pre-burnt grass due to his quick thinking. Unfortunately, all the other men got caught up in the flames before they could make it to the safety of the top of the ridge. And it's in that chase that most of the men lost their lives, some of them gravely injured and then died a day later, while only 3 of the Smokejumpers were able to survive with their lives due to basically quick thinking and a lot of luck. When talking about the book itself, Young Men on Fire, I want to highlight one thing is that it is a hard book to follow. There are so many new people that come into the fold. This is a story of decades where Norman McLean is literally trying to come at every single angle, and he hits constant dead ends up until the point where he can confidently say that he's comfortable with the conclusion that he found, but it literally took him multiple trips to Mann Gulch and multiple different angles to actually get to his conclusion. So the book kind of goes back and forth a lot, introduces a lot of new people, and it is hard to follow. However, it's a key resource if you're looking into the Mann Gulch tragedy, or if you're really into wildfire fighting. I think it's definitely worth checking out, and it is a good book. It can be a lot at sometimes. And like I just mentioned, the book goes into historical figures that had their hands in the Mann Gulch fire, even if they weren't physically there. This is experts that dedicated their time and part of their careers to looking into the Mann Gulch fire, and I think it gives you a big, wider scope of it. It's not just these 16 men that went in to fight the fire. There's a whole bunch of other people, even other fires that are going on at the same time that kind of set up the stage for the Mann Gulch fire. So it's again a really great resource. One thing that is at the center of the book and the controversy of the Mann Gulch fire is Dodge's escape fire. Something really cool about the escape fire is that not only did it save Dodge's life, but it also is taught to new wildfire fighting people that go into the Forest Service as a legitimate survival tactic. And while it's useful today, although very rarely used, back in the day it was the cause of this main controversy, and it caused a lot of questions against the Forest Service for negligence. And the main reason why lawsuits came up and people were upset is because there was no way to definitively prove if Dodge's escape fire just confused and scared his men, causing them to run in front of him. And then also there is a slight chance that his own fire is what consumed his men as they ran past him, basically joining up with the other fire, giving it more momentum to carry up the cliff and basically burn his men alive after he lit it. And that is the heart of the controversy. And it didn't really help that the government then classified some of the files talking about the Mann Gulch fire that day, making people have distrust and, what's going on here. Looking further into Norman McLean's Young Men and Fire and him trying to solve the mystery of what exactly happened that day, the truth of the matter, we come to find out that of the 3 survivors, only Rumsey and Sully lived long enough to work with Norman McLean, whereas Dodge unfortunately passed away only 5 years after the Mann Gulch fire. Rumsey and Sully's accounts were super valuable, but they didn't always align with each other or with the official reports. And one of the most important questions still remained: where exactly was Dodge's escape fire? That is at the heart of the question, because from there, we can determine if it was his fire that ended up causing these 13 men to lose their lives that day. It's years after the fire occurred, when Rumsey and Sully were fully grown into men, no longer being teenage boys. They went back to Mann Gulch with McLean, and they hoped to make a definitive map of what exactly happened that day. The first and main key site that Rumsey, Sully, and McLean ended up heading to on that ridge was the crack in the ridge that the 2 men used to escape the fire, leading them to that rock slide where they were able to allow the fire to pass by them, securing their survival. There was a couple key differences, although it has been decades since their escape was actually in swing. One big change between then and now is the crack seemed a lot smaller and was harder for the men to get through, although they were able to get through and go to the other side and find a rock slide. Another key difference was there was a juniper bush, which one of the men had fallen into after escaping through the crack, and he almost gave up while lying in this bush, so it was a key part of his story. When they got outside the crack, they found out that that bush was no longer a juniper bush, and of course these are all Forest Service guys, so they know their foliage pretty well, so they were all a little bit confused why this bush changed from a juniper bush to a bush of a different species. However, it was just chalked up to misremembering, and it gave the men a good laugh. Regardless, the men pushed forward to that rock slide that saved their lives that day, and from that rock slide, the 2 men, Rumsey and Sully, debated on where Dodge was standing when he lit his escape fire. Each of the men contributed key details that aligned with official reports, but didn't always align with each other in the macro. Rumsey believed one thing, Sully believed another, and the official report was somewhere in the middle. The men could not come to a definitive conclusion, although were able to roughly say where Dodge's escape fire was. That being said, with their memories being vivid in some areas, but also contradictory in others, the mystery of Dodge's escape fire seemed to linger, and Norman McLean wasn't satisfied with the conclusion that they came to. So, years later, Norman McLean returned to Mann Gulch, but this time he was accompanied by a scientist, Richard Rothermel. On this journey, the 2 men split up, trying to triangulate an exact location of where Dodge lit his escape fire, and hopefully get rid of any doubts that Dodge could have been the person that condemned his men to die by lighting it. Now, while Norman McLean was on his journey trying to triangulate a whole bunch of different stories and maps and, rough estimates of yardage by men that were on the scene at the time, he found another crack in the ridge, this one being far larger than the one that he found with Rumsey and Sully, kind of lining up to what they were saying with the other one being too small. And then at the other side, he was able to find a juniper bush. This realization suggests that maybe they were at the wrong crack back when they went with Rumsey and Sully, and their accounts actually aligned much better together than what they previously thought, and that Dodge's position might have been at a completely different location when they went through the smaller crack. So with this key piece of information, and then also tag teaming old maps and other pieces of evidence, the men were able to meet where they thought that Dodge's escape fire would have been lit, and there was key evidence that this was the actual legitimate spot. The proof that they had found the official location where Dodge lit his escape fire was a marker left in 1949. This marker had been buried over decades of overgrowth and pounded down by winter snow and all this kind of stuff, so the marker was completely buried, but these men were able to find it due to their keen observation, proving that on their last expedition with Rumsey and Sully, Norman McLean actually went to the wrong crack, and where just a couple years prior they thought they found Dodge's escape fire that rubbed McLean wrong, was wrong. And this was the actual location where Dodge lit his escape fire. Kind of crazy, big stuff. With now knowing where Dodge lit his fire, having the exact location, Norman McLean, alongside fire scientists, researchers, was able to prove that it wasn't Dodge's escape fire that led to the other 13 men losing their lives on the hill. The main fire would have overtook them regardless. So in the end, the work that was put into Young Men and Fire ended up being able to help clear Dodge's name, showing that his actions weren't of negligence and fear, but just a desperate attempt to survive an impossible situation that did not make that situation any worse. Also, Rothermel's work at Mann Gulch didn't just help McLean solve the mystery, it also helped shape the future of wildlife science. Drawing from his research in the Gulch, he went on to develop Rothermel's fire spread model, the first comprehensive mathematical system for projecting how wildfires move across different fuels, slopes, and weather conditions. It became the foundation for nearly every fire behavior model used by firefighters today. In that sense, the tragedy at Mann Gulch not only changed training and survival tactics, but also spurred breakthroughs that continue to protect firefighters and communities decades later. I want to wrap up this video and the story of the Mann Gulch fire by talking about Dodge, Rumsey, Sully, and Norman McLean, as all of these men unfortunately are no longer with us today. Norman McLean actually passed away before Young Men and Fire was published, and it took a group of people coming together to get this book actually made and gathering all the information that he dedicated the later years of his life to. I believe somewhere in the book he talks about how the search for the truth of the Mann Gulch tragedy was something that kept him energized and kept him going even in his old age. And he also talks about a younger man, slightly younger than him, that was also investigating the Mann Gulch tragedy and ended up passing away of a heart attack. It literally brought him to his grave because he was researching it so much beyond what his body was able to get into. So I think it was a really good thing for someone who was really dedicated to wildland firefighting and also the National Forest Service to devote the later years of his life to researching the biggest smoke jumping tragedy ever. One of the key things that helped this book be so much more interesting but also held back the answers coming to light was Wagner Dodge's death just 5 or 6 years after the Mann Gulch tragedy occurred, when he actually died of cancer and only made it to 38. Then once we look at Walter Rumsey and Robert Sully, we get to see two men that survived the tragedy by sticking together, and then they continued to live Forest Service lives after the fact and even helped Norman McLean with his research. Even though they ended up going to the wrong spot, they did give invaluable information to Norman McLean as he was trying to uncover this whole situation. And both of those men lived long lives, but eventually did pass on. Although at the end of this video, what I'm going to end it off with is a memorial to the Mann Gulch Smokejumpers, as long as James Harrison, who, like you know, wasn't a smoke jumper at the time, but did end up helping and losing his life during this tragedy. And that memorial is led by Robert Sully, I believe. I'm going to double check that, but I believe it was led by Robert Sully. Much more than that, the entire culture, science, research of wildland firefighting has changed drastically due to Mann Gulch. First biggest thing is safety is the biggest concern, no longer speed. Like I mentioned earlier in this video, you have the 10 o'clock fire mindset, where guys would get on the scene of a fire and their entire goal was just to get it out before the next morning instead of basically their own lives. Now, granted, they didn't necessarily know better, and it was a culture, not just an individual mindset. And now the culture is safety first. And now there are about 10 guide rules about firefighting, as well as 18 lookout situations where men are trained to basically be more aware and consider more safety, as opposed to that mentality of just get the fire out. And of course, it is also important to get fires out quickly, but safety first. There's also many safety advances. Tools have been streamlined, as well as radio and communication technology is much better. There are satellite links, and unlike the Mann Gulch strategy where they only brought one radio and it got destroyed right away, now teams are sent with multiple radios, and there even is some aircraft surveillance going on, keeping everyone connected and safe. Also, smoke jumpers nowadays carry much lighter helmets, unlike the football style helmets, and also have fire resistant fabric, as opposed to the wool and canvas normal material that they would set out previously way back in the day. Now it's like all streamlined suit, tools, gear, so it helps them be more effective and safer. There's also a fire shelter that is sent down with every man, which in a way kind of acts as what WWII did, where he kind of burnt all the ground so the fire went around him. This fire shelter, I believe they basically cocoon themselves along the ground, and the fire is able to go past them and not burn them alive, which is worst case scenario. You don't need me to tell you that. So that fire shelter is a huge help with keeping men alive. Now, before I show you that memorial service and get to the end of the video where I just promote myself, I wanted to say that the biggest lesson from Mann Gulch Fire is that it's not just history, it was a guiding force for all of smoke jumping and wildland firefighting to this day, and it helps people be safer, smarter, and hopefully put out more fires. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you guys enjoy this clip that puts a name to all the faces of the men that lost their lives in the Mann Gulch tragedy of 1949. Thank you.
And as we move into the next millennium, it's time to rededicate ourselves to the memory of these fine young men and the lesson their deaths taught us, that wildfires are and always will be dangerous. And we must respect its potential to put a firefighter in harm's way. And the life is precious, and for some, very short. And now please join me in a moment of silence in memory of those 13 young men who lost their lives in Mann Gulch. Robert J. Bennett, Eldon E. Dietert, James O. Harrison, William J. Hellman, Philip R. McVeigh, David R. Navon, Leonard L. Piper, Stanley J. Reba, Marvin L. Sherman, Joseph B. Sylvia, Henry J. Thal, Jr., Newton R. Thompson, and Silas R. Thompson.
All right, little channel update at the end of the video. If you made it this far, make sure to subscribe, just because it'll keep me going, and I want to make bigger and better videos, and I want to dedicate even more time, money, resources, all that kind of stuff to this channel and talking about Montana history. And like I said, I just moved here, so this whole environment will hopefully transform into a really cool studio type thing. I just bought a whole bunch of decorations. We'll see how it looks. I have a terrible taste for setup design, like something about the camera and the background just doesn't click in my mind, but I'm going to try to make it as cool as possible. We're going to figure it out and get a really good system. Also, this video took a lot of work. It was about 50 to an hour long, so I want to make the next video maybe around 30 minutes, just a little bit less of a task and maybe a little bit more fun. This was a super sad tragedy where people just trying to do the right thing ended up losing their lives, and 13 of them ended up losing their lives. That's horrible, obviously. So I think the next video I want to make is going to be a little bit more fun, and then we'll get back to maybe some of the more serious history. I was looking into the Missoula Marauder, or actually I believe it's the Missoula Mauler, but I think the Missoula Marauder sounds cooler. But yeah, looking into the Missoula Mauler and it just seemed a little too depressing. So I'm going to do that, but at a later date. And this next video is going to be more about cryptids or UFOs or something. But yeah, I'm going to be dedicating a lot of time to this, and I'm thinking about maybe even starting a more podcast style type joint after this video, where I get to just sit down with someone and talk about this, because there's a whole bunch of details that I left out in this video because it just didn't really fit, and this video is already long enough. But there's a whole other person in Norman McLean's book. His name started with a J, but basically he was fighting other fires at the same time as the Mann Gulch fire was occurring. And he ended up having to just recruit a whole bunch of guys from bars. So all these like drunk guys literally sobering up on a mountain fighting a fire. Like, that's so cool. So that's more of like something I want to talk about in the podcast. And it didn't really fit in this video, and every video has stuff like that. So that might be coming soon. We'll see. Also, like I mentioned, the merch, great way to support me. Although I think the best way for you to support me is just to tell a friend, subscribe, comment, and leave a like, just to get people knowing about this awesome thing we got going. Thank you so much for joining me, and I hope you learned a lot about smoke jumping and Montana. See ya. So we're going to call this a really fun Easter egg. I was laying in my bed and I'm in my pajamas, and I'm currently working on the Mann Gulch video, or should I say Mann Gulch video, because I just realized in the background of all of my shots, I have Gulch spelled wrong. Which, if you didn't know this about me, which how would you? I cannot spell very good. I think I'm smart enough to be dangerous in many different ways. Spelling is not one of them. So this is just between you and me. No need to tell anybody in the comments. No need to make a note of it. Kind of embarrassing for me. Been telling everybody that this is going to be my next night of the Grizzlies, which is my most popular video. Trying to make this one just as good, and big spelling mistake throughout the entire thing. I literally didn't erase that the entire video. It was just up there. So, yeah. Go Devin. Good job. Good job.